Yeah, I heard you make a really cool analogy in your lecture that you gave on this, and you said, imagine throwing a grenade into a bucket of paint, you know, and that bucket of paint splatters on the wall, and you get the Mona Lisa. Except, really, that doesn't even. That's just an analogy for us to get our mind, working in that sense. But that doesn't even really describe it. I mean, the chances of that happening are slim to none. So my guest today is Don Deal, and Don is the Director of Research and Development for NGIM, Norman Geisler International Ministries. We've had David Geisler on the program, and so big fans of what they're doing with NGIM. He has a master's degree in Biblical Theological Studies from Luther Rice University, Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary, and he's pursuing his PhD right now in intercultural studies. I think emphasis on Islam with Columbia International University. So pretty good background there. But we're excited to have you on, Don. Thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Well, thanks for having me, Clark. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a little while now.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. We're talk today a little bit about the Big Bang Theory. I heard you give a lecture on who's afraid of the Big Bang. So that's going to be kind of our subject for the day. So I wanted to have you on. I told you before the podcast, I'm sort of a layman when it comes to these things, and I'm sure a lot of my audience is as well. And so I excited to have you on, let you break down a little bit of the cosmology behind the Big Bang, and how this actually points to a universe that's been created, or a universe that's been designed by God. And the Big Bang is not something that I think we should be afraid of. It's good evidence for a theistic God. So we're going to talk some about that today. So that leads me into my first question, Don. And it's pretty simple. What is the Big Bang Theory? At the base level, what's the Big Bang Theory?
Well, actually, there's a series of Big Bang theories. It's you start off in any scientific endeavor with a series of ideas, and they're described differently. So you have different kinds of Big Bang theories. As time goes down, they winnow that down to less and less until you get to a point where you're pretty sure this is the most accurate description. I think what most scientists would tell you is they're not looking for the exact truth, because there's some ways science can never determine that. They're looking for what they call verisimilitude. That is, as close to the truth as they can get, a theory that describes what actually went on.
Okay.
So in short, the Big Bang Theory is the origin and development of the universe itself. It's the description scientifically of how the universe began and how it grew to reach the point where we are now, based simply on physical evidence.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear the Big Bang Theory, for whatever reason, Christians growing up have been made to feel like that is some kind of attack, I guess, against God. And so your lecture was, who's afraid of the Big Bang? So that's my next question, is who is afraid of the Big Bang, and why are they afraid of it? And maybe why should they not be so afraid of it?
That's an excellent question. That is why I brought it up, because I was coming across so many Christians who were afraid of it. I knew why atheists were afraid of it, because if the Big Bang Theory is the origin of everything that is, the Big Bang Theory says out of nothing comes matter, energy, space, and time. That points to a transcendent, not immanent within the universe, but a transcendent creator of some sort. And for atheists, Sir Fred Hoyle was an atheist till, as far as I know, till the day he died. Mm-hmm. He started the steady state theory that the universe is eternal and always existed and infinite in size and age. And he tried to make that into a scientific theory by coming up with explanations. And the reason he did it, he said, was simply because the Big Bang points to religion. That is, to a transcendent creator that's always been there. So atheists are afraid of it simply because of what it points to. As a matter of fact, when Albert Einstein came up with his general theory of relativity in 1916, he originally had a fudge factor put in there he called it the cosmological constant, in which he made the math make the universe static in order to make it fit his preconceived notions of an eternal, static, infinite universe. Unfortunately, he put that in there not because it naturally flowed out of the theory, but he put it in there in order to fit what he already believed. And later on, when so much evidence came in that the universe did indeed begin, he called that fudge factor, that cosmological constant, he called that the greatest blunder of his scientific career. Many scientists hate the Big Bang and hate the theory itself and try to find ways around it simply because it points to something beyond the physical. Many Christians I come across dislike it because it has they have two ideas they don't like about it. Number one, the Big Bang Theory is the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago, and for them that indicates there's time for evolution and other non God involved activities to take place. It sounds like you're saying the Bible, which seems to teach for a younger universe, is somehow disproved or discredited by this theory. And number two, the most common misconception they have is that the Big Bang is kind of like a bomb exploding. That is, that in some sense there was pre-existing space, and the Big Bang is the matter exploding into that pre-existing space. But that's not what the Big Bang Theory says. It says space came into existence, expanded, and brought the matter and energy with it. That matter and energy are interchangeable, and that they brought that with it. So it's a beginning not just of the matter in the universe, but it's a beginning of space, and it's a beginning of time. That is, scientifically, the question, what happened before the Big Bang, makes no sense. It was the origin of time. And if you want to know who taught that idea first, you just have to look at the writings of the Apostle Paul. He talks about how before time began, God had planned everything that was going to happen. So Christians who believe that the Bible teaches a younger earth are sometimes not happy with the Big Bang, and atheists hate the Big Bang as far as what it implies beyond the confines of the universe.
Right. We'll come back to some of the theistic positions as well, but you hit on this a little bit. I wonder if you could expound on it. It seems like for a long time, well, it's pretty well known that for a long time, scientists thought that the universe was infinite in the past, that it's just always been here.
Right.
So you hit on the theory of general relativity that was a big and large part of why we no longer accept that the universe has an infinite past, that it has an actual absolute beginning. So I wonder if you could expound on that a little bit. Why do the models that predict the universe from an infinite past or assert the universe as an infinite past, why do those come up short? What are some of the things that we now know that point to an absolute beginning?
That's a good question, Clark. It's interesting that even well before the time of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, before his days at all, they knew people who thought about it, scientists, or as I used to call them, natural philosophers who thought about it, realized that there cannot be an infinite eternal universe for two lines of evidence that don't require any Einstein or Hubble discovering the expansion, etc. Doesn't require any of that. Number one, under a Newtonian system, Isaac Newton, of course, formulated the laws of gravity and motion and such. Under a Newtonian system, if the universe is infinite, and that means there's an infinite number of objects and an infinite number of space, well, gravity acts over a distance by the inverse square law. If you're twice as far away from an object, you get 1/4 the amount of gravitational pull. But if you have an infinite number of objects in an infinitely old universe, then the gravitational potential at any point in the universe should be infinite. It's cumulative. And although I've gained weight over the years, I'm pretty sure that I'm not infinitely heavy here. Well, if you change that and you say, well, we have a infinite number of objects in a finite aged universe that hasn't been around forever, what happens under Newtonian physics? Well, all those points would pull to a central point. They would all draw into a central point. Uh, if you have, if you have a finite size universe that's infinitely old, then over time they would all eventually attract towards a central point. Like the supermassive black holes that they have good evidence for believing at the center of our galaxy and others. So either way, just understanding Newtonian, Isaac Newton's version of gravity before Einstein changed it or added to it, even just under a simple Newtonian understanding of gravity, it couldn't be infinite either in size or age. Either way, you end up with problems that don't exist right now. So it should have been proved. That's one way that they should have known, and many did. The second one is known as Olber's paradox. If you think about it this way, if the universe is infinitely large and infinitely old, then light could have traveled to where we are from anywhere in the universe over an infinite amount of time. When we look at the sun, it looks very bright. Now imagine an infinite number of suns shining for an infinite amount of time. Every direction you look at, why would there be darkness? There would be no nighttime. Every direction you look, your line of sight should be caught up on a sun. Yeah. So because the sky isn't the brightness of the sun in every direction, we know that it can't be an infinite amount of time or an infinite number of stars, that it has to be finite. So even well before Einstein's time, there was very good evidence and reasons for understanding it couldn't be infinitely old, regardless of whether you followed the teachings of the Bible or not. Just logic indicates it couldn't be. Besides the purely philosophical arguments, the physical arguments show that it couldn't be infinitely old or infinitely large. So they knew that, but it's kind of like I'm sure you've heard the term cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. It's where a person has two ideas they keep in their head. They believe both of them, but if they put them together, they conflict with each other. I'll give you an example. An atheist may posit that love is a biochemical illusion produced in the brains of mammals in order to get them to procreate and keep the DNA going. That's their scientific explanation of love. Mm-hmm. But they also love their family. They love their spouse. So they have I think love is valuable, true, and I know it and feel it intensely on one side of their brain. And they got this logical explanation that says it's really nothing. It's just chemicals reacting in my brain, causing electrical potentials, etc., that equal out to the illusion we call love. Well, they have this idea it's nothing but physics, and it's a real, deep, and meaningful thing that's real. And they keep those separated in their head, cognitive dissonance. The same thing with people who didn't want to believe that God created the universe. The evidence was there long before the time of Albert Einstein that indicated that the universe couldn't be eternal and infinite, but they chose not to think about it.
Right. Yeah. I hear these theories that are thrown out, and yeah, I think they're sort of trying to salvage an infinite universe because that would do away with the need for God or anything that would bring time, space, matter into beginning. Because we would be logical to say that if time, space, matter, energy had a beginning, it would have to be timeless, spaceless, immaterial. And so these are just a few things that we're rationalizing God from the evidence that we have, and so it's not a blind God of the gaps. It's that there's evidence that points to the universe from a beginning, or the universe from nothing. So there are atheists out there, though, that will say they'll give us the Big Bang Theory, and I would say that most scientists today do give you the Big Bang Theory. They will say that the universe had an absolute beginning, that it was not infinite in the past, and they'll try to salvage other theories to make that work. So Lawrence Krauss, for example, wrote A Universe from Nothing. So what do atheistic scientists or physicists believe brought the universe into existence? What is Lawrence Krauss getting at when he says a universe from nothing?
Well, Lawrence Krauss is equivocating. Equivocating is when you use two different one word in two different senses. And so when he says nothing, what he says is in the book that philosophers and laymen don't know what nothing means. I mean, if you can get over the hubris of that, the simplest definition of nothing is what Aristotle said. Nothing is what rocks dream of.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing. It
Right.
means what Lawrence Krauss is positing is that when we say nothing, we mean no physical objects. And so he posits that the universe began kind of like in quantum mechanics, there's a theory of virtual particles, and that the universe began from a hyperspace and that it sprang into existence in the same way virtual particles come into existence. Number one, hyperspace isn't nothing. And number two, a good critique of that theory is given by other physicists, is that the theory of, they call them, in the first place, they call them virtual particles in quantum mechanics. That's the theory that within empty spaces, we would call it, there's no such thing actually as empty space within the universe. It's roiling with fields. There's gravity, there's light going through it, there's Higgs field, which is a hypothetical field which gives objects mass. There's all these fields that's roiling with energy, and sometimes those, kind of like a wave on the ocean, when they reach a certain potential, an object will pop into existence along with this antiparticle. So you get a subatomic particle, this antiparticle pop into existence, and then they recombine and disappear back into the quantum foam, into the subatomic space. The key to understand about that is the more massive the particle, the more energetic the particle that pops up in quantum mechanics, the shorter its lifespan. If the universe is that sort, then it should have gone out of existence correspondingly that much quicker because it's that much larger and more energy. So it's just, what he's saying is just nonsense. No scientist has accepted his theory. He threw it out there as an example of a way to kind of get around a Big Bang being caused by a transcendent creator. It's not accepted by any physicist I know. I know physicists who know Lawrence Krauss, and they think he was just being contrary, that he wasn't actually taking this seriously.
Wow. Yeah, and I think that's one of those things too. You get two different working ideas. I think that when you say a universe from nothing, obviously you don't have to be a philosopher to understand that nothing means no thing, nothing, no quantum vacuum, no energy, nothing, and so that's what the evidence points to, that time, space, matter had a beginning, but before that there would have to be nothing. And so we're seeing evidence for that, and I think they're just trying to hold to whatever theory they can hold on to, or to kind of rework the word nothing, and so they come up with competing models. So what are some of the competing models that atheists are putting forward that are out there now in regards to competing with the standard Big Bang theory?
Well, in the past, there was the fluctuating universe, which expands, reaches a certain point, contracts, and it goes through a series of growth and contraction periods where it kind of cycles in and out of existence. Many of our Hindu friends thought that was a very great idea because it kind of corresponded to how they see reality. However, the physics shows that simply couldn't happen. At best, you get maybe 2 to 3 rebounds, and then it's gone. And then if you look at the actual evidence, that's mathematically speaking. If you look at the evidence of our universe itself, in about 1998 or 99, Alex Filipinko at the University of California and other scientists were studying what's called type 1a supernovae, which are very, very bright supernovae, in which you can get an idea, use them as a standard candle. That is, if you see that type of supernova, you know how bright it actually is at its point, and then how bright it is at Earth will tell you how far away it is. Kind of like if you hold, they call it a standard candle. If you hold a candle in your face, you have to blink because it's so bright. If you have that same candle a block away, it looks pretty dim. So the further away, as long as you know the brightness of that candle, you can calculate how far away it is, because light also decreases by the inverse square law. So you can calculate how far away. If you know how bright the candle was here in your face, then when it's a mile away, you can calculate that by the brightness change. Well, if you know the absolute brightness of a type 1a supernova, then how bright it appears on Earth will tell you, from our position, will tell you how far away the object is. So using those, anyway, that's a digression, but Filipinko and the others involved discovered that the universe isn't just expanding, but it's increasing in its rate of expansion. That is what they call the dark energy coefficient, is causing the universe to expand at a faster rate, such that there's not enough gravitational force to cause a recollapse ever. It's beyond that point. At this point, if you're a non-believer, then the future of the universe is a heat death. Simple adiabatic cooling. As a system expands, with a finite amount of energy in it, then the amount of energy spreads out, becomes more diffuse, then you get cooling. Same thing happens on Earth. If a air mass is moving across the surface of the Earth and strikes a mountain range and moves up, it cools because it expands and cools. As the universe expands, it cools. So the future of the universe, by the materialist understanding, is a universe that dies a heat death. So
Yeah.
you were asking specifically about how you get around the origin Big Bang. I discussed problems with Krauss's model. But the most common thing you hear these days is the multiverse theory. That is, that there's more than one universe, that there's actually a series of universes, or an infinitely large universe.
Yeah. Well, what does that mean? The multiverse theory. When you're talking about a series of universes, I think it's hard for people like myself to just even wrap their mind around a series of universes. Getting outside of our own universe, I can't really wrap my mind around that. But the multiverse theory, what is it in a nutshell? And what do you make of the multiverse theory?
Well, there's different models of the multiverse. There's they call different levels. Level 1 multiverse says that we live in a universe that we can observe to be a certain size, but that limitation of the observation is based on light. If the light doesn't reach us, we can't see it, and that there's a finite or perhaps even infinitely large regions beyond our view.
Wow.
That there's certain models that say the Big Bang happened and now the universe is infinite. That's kind of violates what it means to be infinite, because you can't get to infinite by starting with the number one. And if the universe began, it's potentially infinite, but could never actually be infinite. But level 1 multiverse just says that the universe is much, much bigger, thousands of times bigger perhaps than what we observe, and that other regions may have different physical laws, and that we happen to be in the region that allows physical life to come about. A level 2 multiverse says that there's basically a kind of like Krauss's hyperspace, in which universes are constantly popping into existence. So you have an infinitely old hyperspace which constantly creates universes with different physical parameters each time, so that we are lucky because we're in the universe that happens to have physical parameters. And Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe has calculated more than 480 different physical parameters that have to exist for us to have life on Earth, down to very minute levels, including the difference between the gravity and the weak nuclear force, the balance of those two forces. If it's off by 1 part in 100 trillion, 1 part of that, then physical life doesn't exist. So to explain the designedness of our universe, they come up with the idea of lots of universes, and ours just happens to be one of them that has the physical laws in it. And they posit up to an infinite number of other universes. The level 3 multiverse is based on an interpretation of quantum mechanics, which says that, like Schrodinger's cat, have you heard that story where you have a cat in a box and it's got a nuclear element that's decaying, and then once it reaches a certain point, the box will release poison gas and kill the cat inside. And so you're at the point where it's 50-50, and by quantum mechanics, nothing has happened until an observer views it. And at that point, then the cat's either dead or alive when you open the box. But until that point, he's both dead and alive, if that makes any sense. And so what they say is that at each point in the universe, when there's a chance for more than one thing to happen, each thing does happen. It just branches into a new universe. And so if you roll a single die, 6 new universes are created.
Wow.
Yeah, let's just say there's, and there's a higher level one that combines, they call M theory, which basically combines all those multiverses into one model, kind of subsumes all those into one model. And let's just, the key thing to know in this case is number one, the primary motivation for the multiverse theory is what I mentioned before, the extreme designedness, the amount of detail that it took to design a universe to allow physical life to exist. It's a way to explain it away. And number two, the key thing to know is that there's no physical evidence for a multiverse. By the laws of the general theory of relativity, you can't examine outside of our universe.
I think that's such a huge point. I think people, you watch, we talked a little bit before the podcast about, there's popular movies that I watch now that the multiverse theory is always in the background, or you read comic books. If you're a comic book fan,
Next
there's a,
Doctor Strange movie, The Multiverse of Madness.
there you go. There you go. It's out. It's everywhere. And so it's really a popular, and I think it's fun for sci-fi. But I think outside of that, there is no empirical evidence for it, and I don't think people realize that. That just a layperson like myself that's just watching these films,
Yeah.
or hearing Lawrence
Yeah.
Krauss, or hearing these guys.
If I can interject something here, I think it's some important point to make is that most people who don't study science don't understand in physics that there's basically two fields of physics. There's experimental physics and there's theoretical physics.
Mm.
Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, those fellows are involved in theoretical physics. They come up with ideas and try to mathematically model them, and then the experimental physicists can test those theories to see if they're real. The problem is people treat those ideas, which are just basically philosophical concepts, as if they were reality.
Right.
And the people who are most popular on the news are the gee whiz, wow, watch this guy come up with this amazing theory. Except what they don't realize is not just the dearth of evidence, but the complete lack of evidence for these theories. In the case of the multiverse, it follows naturally from string theory, this theory of the subatomic particles, but there's no physical evidence for that either. So you end up with this philosophy supports this philosophy, and this is probably true because this philosophy supported it.
Right.
Well, this one supported this one supported this one. What you have is circular reasoning that says there must be a multiverse because I don't like the designedness of this universe. It's literally that the thinking's literally that bad, and I can find you multiple quotes from scientists who either admit their truth of it or so clearly are being evasive about it on this subject because they don't want there to be a creator.
I think it's so important that you make that distinction between theoretical physics and those who are actually, doing the, not that these guys are not doing the work, but I'm just saying, right, they kind of get all the shine. You see their books on the shelves. I mean, leaping off the shelves. And these are theories. At the end of the day, they are theories, and so we're typically accused of being the ones who have so much faith. You have faith because you just believe God, but it's not a blind faith that Christians have, and I think this is just so key that we're not just saying, "Oh, God did it," because we don't know the answer. We actually see the empirical evidence, reasoning from that to the universe had a beginning, to saying, okay, well, if time, space, matter had a beginning, the creator had to be timeless, spaceless, and material. That makes sense to me philosophically, and it may not be something that you can test, but at least it philosophically holds up, even if you can't test that necessarily in a lab. Whereas some of these other theories I'm hearing, they don't even philosophically make a lot of sense. Right. You have to really, really stretch to say the multiverse exists, but even if it did, you still have to have most of these guys believe in a multiverse generator. Right. Because these universes are popping into existence. So that generator itself, and I've heard Christian philosophers make this argument, would have to be finely tuned. It'd have to be extremely powerful. You still have another problem. You've just kicked the can further down the road, and now you have a new problem to explain. Yeah. So I think that's important to point out. I think you're making a good distinction there when we talk about the multiverse.
Yeah, I talked to an astronomer and I asked him about his opinion of the multiverse, and he called it conjecture squared. You get one idea and you say, well, maybe this times this times this times this, and you end up with the multiverse. That is, the physical evidence is singularly lacking for a multiverse, but they're hopeful.
Right.
Uh,
I've heard it go so far as, this just blows my mind, but hearing people speculate about a multiverse, that there's such an infinite amount of universes that there actually may be someone like me,
oh
exactly
yeah,
like me, who
I
lives
love you. Yeah,
in another universe, who makes like all the exact same decisions that I've made, who may in another universe. It blows my
yeah,
mind, because if you have
oh,
infinite number of something,
yeah,
all things are
yeah.
possible in that sense.
Well, not just all things are possible, all things have to happen in an infinite number. I think what happens is people once again equivocate. They use infinite to mean really large, and infinite doesn't mean large at all. It means not finite. If something can be numbered or measured, it's finite.
Mm.
If it's a different category, it's infinite. So what you end up with, if you really believe there's an infinite number of universes, then every potentiality is instantiated in at least an infinite number of universes, because you can't define infinity. So I tell people, if the multiverse belief that there's an infinite number of universes is true, then I have really, really bad luck, because I happen to live in the universe where I'm short, fat, and bald. There's an infinite number of universes where I'm the most powerful person. I'm tall and good looking and have wonderful hair, and all the women and all the money all belong to me. I live in a universe where I happen to look like this.
Yeah.
So
That's a
they
good
just try to
point.
get them thinking about what infinity actually means.
Right.
If you start something, it can't be infinite.
Yeah, actualizing infinity is
Right.
so. I don't think people realize how hard it would be to actually actualize it. Even if we're talking about just the infinite, let's say an infinite regress or an infinite past, you'd
Yeah.
never get to this day if there was an infinite past. You can't even actualize getting to this moment.
Sure. I
So,
like to lead them on a discussion of that. I say, if you start from now, when will you reach infinity in the future? And they say, you can't. And I say, well, if you started the infinite past, how did you ever reach here in the first place?
exactly.
And the answer is you can't.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and actually, that's actually become a scientific theorem at this point. Three scientists, Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin, about 10 years ago, came up with what they call the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, strangely enough. And in it, they've showed that if the universe on whole is expanding, it had to have a finite point of existence. That is, it began. And so
Right.
it's a scientific. It's not. It's they say the mathematics are inescapable. So the universe had to have begun.
Right. I know Alexander Friedman, George Lemaitre, they had, made some important discoveries to show that the universe is expanding.
Yeah.
Then you got Edwin Hubble, who's capturing redshift,
Mm,
to show that the universe is expanding. And, it's pretty simple. It's not a stretch to say, what do you get when you reverse the process? If it's
yeah.
expanding, you reverse it. Well, if we had a video camera in space and we were recording it expanding, and then we rewinded the camera, it would contract into nothing. And so that's kind of the Big Bang Theory in a nutshell. But it's that we have so much physical empirical evidence for a finite beginning, and I don't know if that's taken seriously enough,
No,
because
I tell you how when I'm reaching out to unbelievers, what I'll say is either, can you understand why I might believe in a creator God? That is, instead of trying to force them to accept my view, just try to get them to understand how I'm thinking. Or I say, matter, energy, space, and time began. Can you just think about that for a little while?
yeah,
Just to kind of get them out of their accepted way of thinking. If you want to keep a person an atheist, you keep them busy, you keep them from thinking about what really matters in life and the deeper questions. If you want
mm,
to move them away, just ask them to think these kind of thoughts, and it helps to move them.
yeah. And I think we'll shift gears a little bit here to the theological implications, because I think that's a good point to move to that. But uh, just so our listeners understand how, and we've talked about it a little bit, but how do we reason from the Big Bang to a theistic God? How do we make that transition to a theistic God? Is that just a leap? Is it a plugging in God of the gaps, or is there some good reasons to
No,
make that move?
just so your listeners will understand, God of the gaps is when science can't explain something and we say, well, God did it.
Right.
Like what keeps the planets on their courses, because under Newtonian system, there should be some perturbations that lead to planets wandering off. and yet somehow they stay in place. How do they do it? Well, God did it. And so God of the Gaps is basically an argument from ignorance. It says, if you can't explain it, then I'm going to pop in God and I'm right because you can't prove me wrong. That's discredited way of thinking. What we're doing is we're working logically from what we do know to the possibilities. And when you put the various lines of evidence together, it leads to a certain conclusion. So if matter, energy, space, and time began, then whatever originated that is not made of matter, energy, space, and time. Because if those began, then whatever pre-existed those can't be those things. So you end up with a matterless, immaterial, no physical energy, and matter, energy are interchangeable. So you can kind of think of those as a similar category. So it's not physical, timeless, that is eternal, and spaceless, that is infinite. And when we talk about God being infinite, some people kind of get this idea we're talking about a really, really, really big God. We're talking about a different category of existence than we experience. We see things in a we say three-dimensional, with time four-dimensional, but we just say three-dimensional space, length, width, breadth, and height. We think of things like that, and we just extrapolate that to a really large size, and we think of God like that, really big. That's not what the word infinite means in this sense. In this sense, the word infinite means a different category than. So what I like to say to people to kind of get them thinking the right way, if they don't understand what I'm talking about, is I'll ask them, where does 2 + 2 = 4? And I say, does 2 + 2 = 4 everywhere? And they'll generally say yes. And I say, can you point to 2 + 2 = 4? You say it's everywhere. Can you point to it? Well, because conceptual objects like numbers and such aren't physically instantiated. Therefore, they're not finite in the sense that they don't fit anywhere within a physical three-dimensional universe. It's a different category. It's true everywhere, but it's not true at any exact point. And God, in that sense, doesn't exist the way we do. As the Bible says, my ways are not your ways. God is different from us. No temple can house him. That is, he's infinite in the sense that he's not finite. He's not physically extended. He's not a giant. He's a different category of existence that can exist without space, without time. He's timeless, immaterial. So whatever created the universe fits what the Bible describes as God. And I would argue, as far as non-physical things, minds and ideas would fit that category. Whatever created the universe isn't like a physical law, in spite of what Lawrence Krauss or Stephen Hawking in his book, The Grand Design, said. It's not a physical law that creates, because physical laws either can create continuously. If it was a creative law, it would be continuous, or it's either on or off. There's no other choice. What happened is a choice was made to create by a non-physical being, which, like a mind, makes a choice without having to be physically instantiated. It doesn't have to be physically encapsulated in a skull or whatever. A mind that's extremely powerful and extremely smart, that could put all these parameters to make a universe that works and allows us to live, created that. So you have a incredibly powerful, incredibly smart mind that exists outside the universe. If that's most of the description of God from the Bible, right offhand.
Right. Yeah, I think that's another thing. We have evidence in the natural realm that minds bring forth order. If I'm going to sit down on my computer and type in a code to make a function in my computer, my mind is very important at that point. Orders don't just generate randomly or without some kind of driving force. And so we see you hit on the fine tuning, and I know that's a whole podcast in itself for another day. But the fine tuning that we already see in the universe, the order that we already see, these are all things that point. So it's a cumulative case, and I don't think people take that as a whole. Like, I might can speculate as the multiverse theory. I might could imagine that theory. I might could even speculate on an infinite universe and try to imagine that. But when you look at the breadth of the cumulative case, the evidence that we do have, there's more than one reason to believe that it is a powerful being that brought the universe into existence. It's personal in order to choose to bring the universe into existence. Um, Minds give evidence for a personal creator as well. That's evidence for that. Um, it'd have to be timeless, immaterial. So I just see the reasoning, the logic as being a cumulative case for a theistic God, versus anything else. I've heard atheists say, well, what you can call it God, I'll call it a computer, but when you look at the cumulative case, it definitely fits the description of the God of the Bible. So we're moving into a very specific realm, which we can move into to Christian theology at that point. So I see the case being made from a cumulative case. There's just a lot of evidence pointing to a theistic creator there.
Yeah. It's interesting that Arno Penzias is one of the two guys that built the detector that detected the cosmic microwave background, the energy left over from the creation event in the 1960s. He said the results we found were exactly what I would expect if I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Gospels, and the Old Testament. He said that what they found through science is exactly what you would expect if you read the Bible first. And there was another scientist whose name escapes me right now who said it's as if we scientists have been climbing up this mountain of knowledge for centuries. And when we reach the top, we find the theologians waiting for us.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's pretty amazing to see. There's just certain scriptures that leap out too. You're reading the Word of God, and there's certain things that just that leap out. That the biblical description of this God fits within our evidence that we have for this Creator. So I think it's important to know. So we hit on this a little bit, but I think there's good evidence that it's a personal agent. So why? Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. Just why would a theistic God also be a person? Why can't it just be that there's this big, powerful force that brought the universe into existence and doesn't care about you or your thoughts or your
Sure.
life and how you live your life? It just brought the universe into existence, and now the clock is ticking and the mechanisms are all in order and they just work the way they work. Uh,
Right.
you know,
You mean the deistic God? Or are
the
you referring
deistic,
to?
yeah, just a
Yeah.
deistic God. Why wouldn't the deistic God fit that description?
Uh, I think because we've taken into account beyond simply the physical parameters of the universe, the origin of life on Earth, which happened well after the creation of the universe. Every cell in our body contains DNA, and that DNA, as a storage capacity, trillions of times more efficient than any computer chip ever invented. The amount of information that goes into the DNA is just incredibly long. More than the simplest single-celled creature has more than 30 volumes of encyclopedia worth of information within that cell DNA. That DNA is a transmitter and carrier of information. If you think about it, information can be carried or transmitted on different forms. We're using sound waves to communicate. I could write to you a letter and you would read it. It could be carried on the medium of paper and ink. It could be carried on photons on computer screens. It could be carried on sound, maybe even telepathically. But the medium isn't what's important. It's the fact that there's information coming across. And we don't have any examples of information being created without intent. We
Yeah,
have data, which is just raw information, but organized, specific complexity, et cetera, that leads into books. The difference between a book and a printing of random letters of the alphabet is the information content of a book. So if books require a mind behind it and a creative act behind it, what about DNA? As Bill Gates says, DNA is like a computer program, but many, many orders of magnitude more complex than any program ever written. Would we buy software that we thought was generated randomly? No, the molecules. Perhaps scientists can someday explain how the molecules of DNA came to be the way they are. but the information that it carries, it's a transmitter, it's a code that carries information. The source of that information has to be a mind.
Yeah,
So you see God's intervention there, and then of course, besides the general revelation we get from studying nature, we have special revelation from the Bible. And if the two match up, there's a good reason to accept the Bible as the information being given to us that's not available in general revelation from studying nature from that being that created the nature.
yeah. I heard you make a really cool analogy in your lecture that you gave on this, and you said, imagine throwing a grenade into a bucket of
Oh,
paint,
oh yeah,
and that bucket of paint splatters on the wall, and you get the Mona Lisa. Except really, that doesn't even. That's just an analogy for us to get our mind,
yeah.
working in that sense. But that doesn't even really describe it. I mean, the chances of that happening are slim to none.
Yeah, if you think about it, I use another analogy too, where you walk into a computerized control room, and there's on the wall is a bank of 482 different knobs with settings, but anywhere from 0 to 1 trillion.
Mm.
And you look at all 482 knobs, and each one of those trillions of possibilities for each knob is set to the only combination of all 482 that would allow us to be here. So
Yeah.
you get 1 in a trillion times trillion times trillion, and you end up with the odds of the universe being the way it is through random chance is being near infinitely small. It's just it blows my mind that people think that this just happened.
Right.
Even Fred Hoyle, I mentioned before, he was an atheist. He said the overwhelming evidence leads us to believe that there's a super intellect monkeying with the laws of physics.
Yeah.
That in some sense the universe knew we were coming.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, we'll have to, maybe one day get you on to talk about the fine tuning, because I think that's another thing that it's
Yeah.
just there's so much evidence for, and I'd love to give people some of the things to think about that the fine tuning of this universe, and that's why we get these multiverse theories to try to get around it. But it's just so unique. There's nothing like it, and really there's nothing like the fact that we exist in this universe that's largely full of, we can't find signs of life. That's pretty extraordinary. The fact that we're here. So it's a whole different conversation, but it's really a powerful conversation to have.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the atheists typically say about that is, well, of course we find these fine tuning elements. If they weren't there, we wouldn't be able to observe them.
Yeah.
That's their argument. And Bill Craig uses the story of the person being lined up to be shot by 20 expert shots to be executed. They put the blindfold on him. All 20 marksmen line up, and then on the signal they fire, and then he hears the guns go off, but not a bullet hits him.
Mm-hmm.
To the atheist, they'd say, well, of course none of the bullets hit him. He wouldn't be able to say he knew that if
Yeah.
none of the bullets hit him. Well, it requires a level of explanation beyond, of course, he knew that. The question is, why didn't the bullets hit him? Or in the case of the universe, why is the universe the way it is? And a mind that cares about us makes the most sense of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think once again, asking the right questions. I think the objection there misses the claim that we're even making.
Yeah.
The claim is not that a claim from necessity that this is just the way the universe is. But why is it this way? So
Right.
I think it's important to point out the difference there. You hit on this a little earlier, and this is one of my last things I want to ask you about. But some of the fear from Christians of these conversations is the age of the universe. Is this something that Christians should be intimidated by? I mean, if we have evidence that the universe is billions of years old, I know that there are a lot of young Earth creationists that would say that's heretical. They would say, that's crosses the Bible in so many ways. But when I'm reading the book of Genesis and we're talking about days, there are so many different interpretations of just the word day. When you're talking about a day, it can mean so many different things. And so, I personally, where I stand theologically, is I don't have a problem with an old universe. And I know that there are others that would be upset by that. So what is your make of that conversation?
Yeah, well, I certainly, as an apologetic, I certainly I grant the unbeliever the age of the universe, and I say I'll give you that,
Mm.
and you still need God to explain everything. So if you're a young Earth creationist, then you can certainly use that as a technique to get the person. I know of no person who came to believe in a young Earth because they started in science and then became a Christian. That is, that no person who came to believe in a young Earth because of science and then said, well, science shows me there must be a young Earth, therefore I need to be a Christian. I know of no person who followed that route.
Right.
Every young Earth creationist I know, and I've got a great many friends that are young Earth creationists, they start, I believe the Bible teaches the young Earth, and therefore science must be faulty in some way. There must be some mistake they're making in logic or evidence or something they're overlooking in science, or some mistake they're making.
Mm.
And there's various arguments for why why the evidence isn't as good as the materialist or the old Earth creationists believe it is. But overall, you alluded to this earlier. The Hebrew word yom, which is translated as day, has a range of meanings.
Mm.
I mean, it can mean the daylight period. It can mean 24-hour period. It can mean an age. It can mean a finite but an extended but finite period of time. We use the word day the same way as now that they did then. If I say in my great grandfather's day they took horses and carriages around, am I implying in any way that my grandfather lived 24 hours? No, of course not. So we use the word day in a range of meanings that way. Now, I think another thing to keep in mind is that in Hebrew, the entire vocabulary of the Old Testament is only a few thousand words. English has 500,000 words.
Yeah.
There's only a few, less than 5,000 words in the Hebrew vocabulary in the Old Testament. Each word has to be given a range of meanings in order to fit different situations. And so when you read the English version, the translators have made a choice on what they think it means. And there's many good reasons to believe that it's teaching 24 hours. I'm not saying that anybody's crazy to believe that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that to be dogmatic on that issue, I mean, if you were to be with a person on a desert island and you had nothing but you two, and you guys knew your life was going to end soon, and you wanted to tell him about Christ, would you start with 6,000 years ago God created the universe, or would you start with the story of Jesus and what he did for us? So I think that's an important question, the age of the universe, but I don't think it's a defining question for Christian belief. That's where I stand on that.
Okay. Yeah, and I totally agree with that too. Those are fun for me. They're fun conversations to have, and I'm willing to have those conversations and to learn and maybe change my position or learn something. But as far as does it lead to Jesus? Does it is it really is it something that contradicts the gospel message? I don't think it rises to that level at all, and I think sometimes we can get so carried away with those things. And now, in the day that we live in, there I go using day. The day that we live in, it seems to be something that we should really put on the back burner in comparison to atheistic ideas or ideas that God can't exist. I feel like now we're in a different ball game where we're trying to make a case for God's existence in a very secular and cynical age. And so, I think these are the conversations we need to be having that are a little more important in that sense, that we're trying to reach to non-believers these days versus squabbles amongst people who are already convinced that Jesus is the only way to salvation. I just enjoyed kind of bringing that question up because I was just curious. We mentioned it at the beginning, but there are Christians, I think, that are intimidated by the Big Bang Theory, and I don't know if that is a totally plausible thing that you have to be intimidated by that. I think you should be able to look at and say, this is actually something that is positive evidence for theism and Christianity. But this is pointing back to a universe that was created by God. And so it definitely shouldn't be something to run from. If anything, it's to be something that we know more about and share with other people.
Absolutely. Could the universe be young? Absolutely, God could
Sure.
have created this person. Please don't understand. I'm not saying that. Uh, I'm personally, I'm not going to take a hard stance either way.
Right.
For my own self. I'm perfectly comfortable affirming a younger universe. I could be wrong. I
Right.
mean, as far as the age of the universe, either way, I could be wrong. Anybody could be wrong about it. I thoroughly believe that all Christians, if they are truly Christians, have mostly correct belief, but I'm also thoroughly convinced that we all have some mistakes in our thinking. The question
Sure.
is, does it dis, does it eliminate us from joining the heavenly choir, so to
Right.
speak? And I just don't feel like this is an issue that does that.
Right. Yeah. I'm in the same boat. I'm wide open to learning from both perspectives, either the young Earth or the old Earth creationist. I'm wide open to learning new things, and this is something that I am by no means an expert in. And I'm no theologian either. So but I do enjoy apologetics, and I do want to follow the evidence wherever it leads, because I think it's going to lead us back to our Creator, and whether that be evidence of a young Earth or an old Earth. I'll
Mm.
follow that evidence, and I know where it leads, and I think that's what's important, is knowing where the evidence is pointing to.
If I could make one example, in the Middle Ages, before Galileo's time and such, it was common to interpret the Old Testament story of the sun stopping in the sky,
Hmm.
Joshua, that it literally stopped in the sky, and that the earth is the center of the universe, and the sun orbits about the earth because it froze as it was moving in the heavens. And then later on, when we discovered that the sun is the center of the solar system and that the earth revolves around the sun, we changed our interpretation of the Bible verse because of that.
Yeah.
We didn't give up on our belief in God and the Bible. We simply said we were misunderstanding that was using phenomenological language. That is, was using language that describes what you actually saw as opposed to what actually is happening. And so if we've been adjustable to our interpretation based on what we came to know about the world, then I think we should be humble enough to think that's a definite possibility.
Yeah. 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 And I think it's important too to point out that the you know post Copernican revolution, you have most of the scientists that were saying that the sun is the center of the universe were also Christians. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Johannes Kepler, Tycho Brahe, these are Christians, and they were totally okay with the universe, or our universe revolving around the sun, and rather than the Earth, but they still maintain their belief or their faith. And a lot of the scientists up until the Enlightenment age were primarily Christian, and of course, post Enlightenment, it's a different story. But all the way to the Enlightenment period, and still today, I mean, there are phenomenal scientists out there. There are phenomenal, unfortunately, because of because their theories point to God. Sometimes they're labeled as pseudoscientists, just offhand, without giving any credence or credibility to the work they've done, and their use of the scientific method to come to their conclusions. It's kind of a crazy world we live in, where science becomes something that's almost a religion in itself. Science says this and science says that. And it's always important to tell people science doesn't say anything, scientists say things. So, we were talking in the beginning about some of these theories that are theories. There's no empirical evidence, but are sort of put out there as if they are widely accepted as empirically proven things, the multiverse being an empirically proven thing that you should accept. And it's a theory, and there's no evidence, and it's really, there's no way to even examine a multiverse if it were to exist. That's just not something that can be proven. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, science does a tremendous job telling us how the physical world works. But because it's ultimately reductionistic, it's looking for the smallest particles to put together and smallest building blocks to put together to describe things. And it's ultimately only, I mean, they use methodological naturalism. That is,
Mm.
they only look for natural explanations. Well, if you start off only looking for natural explanations and you come to a natural conclusion, who's to be surprised by that?
Right.
Uh, it's like casting a going fishing with a net that has the holes in it that size and saying, oh, there's no minnows in the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just you're using the wrong tools. I mean, there's many things science is blind to. Even Stephen Jay Gould, the Harvard paleontologist, he said that science can tell us what societies hold to be true, to be moral, but science can never tell us what is moral.
Right.
That is, there's certain things that science is just simply not equipped for. I love science. I've been studying and reading it my whole life, but it's a tool which works very well in the areas of which it's specialized, and when it expands beyond that, it's just another form of philosophy which may or may not work.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, one more thing too. What books do you recommend if somebody's listening to this podcast and they think, "Wow, this is something that I want to go further in," or maybe they're new to. We were talking about quantum physics earlier and quantum mechanics, and these are big ideas, and they take a while to wrap your mind around. So, are there any particular books that you might recommend for my audience?
Well, for the older Earth perspective, The Creator and the Cosmos by Hugh Ross is an excellent book on the universe and how the evidence of the universe points to a transcendental creator. Quantum mechanics, I haven't seen that written from a Christian perspective, because basically subatomic particles don't have a whole lot to say about the universe.
Right.
The book I'm reading right now is called The Quantum World, Quantum Physics for Everyone by Kenneth Ford. That's been an excellent book to read. From a young Earth creation viewpoint, go to creation.com and check out their resources there. They have plenty of books on various sciences if you want to enhance your understanding from that perspective. And same thing with Hugh Ross's group, Reasons to Believe. You go to reasons.org and you check out their resources.
Okay, yeah. So is there anywhere that you would point people to go to find what you are doing right now? I know you do some work with Norman Geisler.
Yeah, sure. The website, ngim.org, that's Norm Geisler International Ministries.org. ngim.org is our touch base. There's a link for emails, and there's all the contact information's there to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have a great respect for Norman, and with his passing this past year, it's been something that a lot of apologists have mourned, and he really made an impact on the world. And so it was great having David on. And then David said, you gotta have Don on. He is one of the smartest guys. So I was excited to have you on, man. It's been a privilege.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of him and you to say so.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I've had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anytime. All right, man.
I pop a wheelie and move.